It's finally Arch Manning season after many Texas fans last year wanted the Longhorns to bench Quinn Ewers in favor of Arch Manning. They decided to wait it out, and 2025 is the year Arch Manning is finally at the helm. So let's go ahead and take a look at how we think he's going to do in his first full season as the starter. Starting it off with a road trip to Ohio State. Connor, I think this is a incredibly difficult way to start off your career as the official starting quarterback.
Yeah, without a doubt, this is going to be an electric game. It's a rematch from last year. We saw Arch Manning get a couple snaps in the Cotton Bowl last year, but now it's going to be a home game for Ohio State this time. And yeah, like you were saying, this is definitely not the environment you want to begin your first full season as the starter.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Ohio State, they do have a really, really solid stadium environment, and we have this at a 50-50 game right now. Obviously, Ohio State won this playoff semifinal last year. A lot of both teams ended up going on to the NFL. But for right now, we do believe that with the home field advantage, the Ohio State Buckeyes will win that game. But this is one of the toughest games to predict for sure next season.
Yeah, but it's going to be probably the most anticipated game of the entire season, and it's already in week one. We have rivalry games at the very end of the season that are going to be so hyped up, but this is probably the most anticipated game of the year. And like you were saying, Jonah, both teams are losing a lot, and both teams have just been retooling. They're not in a rebuild kind of year, but I do think, despite what Ohio State has lost, I think the offensive weapons they have and some of the defensive moves that they've made are going to keep them afloat to get a win at home.
Yeah, definitely really could go either way still. Now, the next three games we're kind of just going to run through real quick. San Jose State will be a win, UTEP will be a win, and Sam Houston, although they did show some promise last year, will definitely be a win for Texas still. Not really much to talk about here.
Then after that, they are going to go on the road again, playing Florida. Florida's a team we think is going to be very, very good next season. DJ Lagway, if he can stay healthy, might be a dark horse Heisman candidate, at least in our opinions. I think they've retooled very well and learned from some of their mistakes last year. And I think Billy Napier is really going to take this team up to the next level. And I think with it being at the Swamp, Texas is going to have their job cut out for them.
Yeah, especially since this is really the first true road SEC environment that Arch Manning is going to have this year. Makes it a little bit tougher. Overall, Texas is the more talented team. This is no gimme, but we're going to go ahead and go with the Longhorns here. The next game against Oklahoma, the Red River Showdown, going to be at the Cotton Bowl once again. This will be a really good game this year. Oklahoma brought in John Montier and Jaden Ott out of the transfer portal, two of the best players at their respective positions, quarterback and running back. Oklahoma, while they had a rough transition year to the SEC, I think is ready for a pretty solid season, and I think they're going to give Texas a run for their money here.
Yeah, I think this rivalry game is definitely one of the most even we've seen, at least in recent memory. If I remember correctly, I think they've alternated the past 4 years who wins. And regardless of how good a team is, this is always one of the best games on that week. Like you said, John Matier and Jaden Ott are going to be great additions to this Oklahoma offense. Still have some concerns on defense, but they're also going to be pretty battle tested already, considering they have one of the hardest schedules in the FBS next season. I'm still going to lean on Texas. I think Steve Sarkisian is just a little bit better of a head coach. I think the amount of players, the amount of talent they're bringing in is going to just overwhelm the two-star players that Oklahoma has on offense. After that, I'm going to run through the next two games as well, like we did earlier, at Kentucky and at Mississippi State, back-to-back weeks. Even though these are SEC games, these are the bottom two teams in the SEC, at least in our opinions, next year. And I don't think anyone will question that. Kentucky is a little bit better. We saw them give Georgia a scare and upset Ole Miss last season. And that Georgia game was also at home, too. So Kentucky does have a decent home field advantage, but at the end of the day, Texas is just so superior to both of these teams. So I think they're going to get two wins in a row.
Yeah, Kentucky did bring in a pretty solid transfer quarterback, Zach Calzada, out of Incarnate Word, but he also played at Texas A&M and Auburn prior to that. I think he's going to be a pretty solid addition to lead this offense. Just still, like Connor was saying, Texas is the superior team, and then Mississippi State really even less to talk about. They have Blake Shapen coming back from injury, and I think they'll maybe be a little bit better, but still very low chance to even win an SEC game in 2025. Next up is going to be Vanderbilt. They were the talk of the season last year after upsetting Alabama in what ended up being a deciding factor for Alabama making the college football playoffs. This Vanderbilt team is returning Diego Pavia at quarterback. And with the amount of fight that he showed in last year's games, and including the one against Texas, I think Vanderbilt has a slight chance, but it's really only if they're going to pull off, a crazy upset again. Realistically, this is going to be another win for Texas.
Yeah, and especially considering how close the game was last year, that was at Vandy. I think with it being at Texas this year, I think Vandy is going to lose any sort of advantage that they possibly could have, even with Diego Papia returning. These last three games down the stretch are relatively difficult, probably their toughest stretch of the season, starting with their rivalry game, if you want to start calling it that, considering how much they played last year going on the road to face Georgia. Texas lost both times last year to Georgia, both during the regular season and in the SEC championship game that saw Carson Beck get knocked out and Gunnar Stockton lead that Bulldogs team to the SEC championship. And I think this year it's going to be just as close as it was last season. But the difference now is that I truly trust Arch Manning more than I trust Gunnar Stockton. I think Gunnar Stockton can still lead a very solid Georgia offense. But Arch Manning, if he can play to the level that these expectations are at, I think that this is going to be a pretty big win for the Longhorns on the road at Athens. It could go either way. This Georgia defense, as we've seen year after year, is one of the best in the country, especially when you have Kirby Smart as the head coach. But I really think this is the year Texas gets over the hump.
I think, yeah, like Connor was saying, this is going to be a really, really good game. Most likely going to come down to the wire. It's going to be a really tough game, I'm sure. But keep in mind, Arch Manning will have already played at Ohio State, at Florida, two very tough environments. I think he'll be a little bit more prepared for this one, have a full season almost under his belt. And I think that's going to play into it a little bit as well. Next up is Arkansas, and the Razorbacks are bringing back Talon Green, who was a pretty solid starting quarterback for them last year. He's very athletic, and he's going to lead a pretty solid Arkansas team this season. However, the Razorbacks realistically are more of a just barely above bowl eligible team if they can make it to that. And Texas, like we know already, is going to be a playoff contender. The fact that this is at home certainly gives Texas even more of an edge, about 80%, and we are going to go with a Texas win.
Yeah, I definitely think Texas will most likely come out victorious in this game, but I do think this is a potential trap game for them on their schedule, even though it is a home game, considering that it's between Georgia and their last game of the season being that rivalry game against Texas A&M. Texas A&M bringing back Marcel Reed after he came in to replace Connor Weigman after he was benched. And I really think Texas A&M can take some steps forward. I think Marcel Reed is a pretty athletic guy that can lead this A&M offense. I think they showed flashes last year of just how good they could be, but just ran into a really difficult schedule, both in the non-conference, having that Notre Dame game early on in the season, and then just having a ridiculously tough SEC schedule. I think this could be an interesting game once again, but with Texas having the home field advantage, I think the Longhorns will come out on top. It'll be a little interesting and very close game, but I think I'm going to stick with history on this one.
Well, there hasn't been much history recently, given that there was a roughly decade hiatus from this game. However, Texas won the game last year. They have the home field advantage this year. And kind of like you were saying, I think that they are just a little bit more talented, especially on the defensive side of the ball. A&M's brought in a lot of high star recruits over the past few years, but they haven't really developed them as well as Texas has been doing. So I do think that the Longhorns will get the job done. Our way too early projection back in March for the Longhorns was 9.4 wins. and we ended up predicting them to go 10-2. Obviously, the prediction has changed a little bit as we've upped it to 11-1, undefeated in SEC play. However, the projection dipped just a little bit to 9.3 wins with 5.8 SEC wins. Now, we also went ahead and made a ceiling and a floor. I think the ceiling, obviously, undefeated. The Longhorns have the ability to do it this season. One of very few teams that I think can go undefeated in 2025. It's not something that's very common anymore. And then the floor is going to be 8 wins and 4 losses, with only 3 of those being in the SEC.
If Arch Manning plays like the top Heisman candidate that a lot of people are saying he can be, the sky's the limit for this team. I think something a lot of people are forgetting about is that the running back room for Texas looks like it can be really good. Obviously, you have contributing Wisner returning, but CJ Baxter is also back. He missed all of last season due to an injury, and he could be the lead back next year if he is able to return to form. And that's a horrible backfield for defenses to guard. And with the amount of money that Texas is spending, this could be a national championship level team. So, thank you guys for watching. Please make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss out on any more of our videos, including the continuation of this series, and we will see you in the next one.